The British government is reeling after two high-profile cabinet ministers quit within hours of each other over the troubled Brexit strategy. They include Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. He says in his resignation letter, the Brexit dream is dying. Now, as the CBC's Thomas Daigle reports, the future of the Conservative government is in question.
Within 24 hours, Theresa May went from having supposed cabinet support for her Brexit plan to being blindsided with two major resignations from her cabinet over this signature policy. First, the man tasked with negotiating Britain's exit from the European Union, Brexit Secretary David Davis, quit, and today he was followed out the door by Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who wrote a scathing resignation letter saying Britain is headed for a Brexit. In his words, we are truly headed for the status of colony, and many will struggle to see the economic or political advantages of that particular arrangement. He's referring to the policy proposal Theresa May has put forward to keep the UK connected to the European Union through a free trade zone. The Prime Minister was still adamant in the House of Commons today that her approach is the best for the future of this country.
I've listened to every possible idea and every possible version of Brexit. Mr. Speaker, this is the right Brexit.
Now, this crisis comes the same week as the Prime Minister is supposed to go to Brussels for the NATO summit, and she's supposed to welcome Donald Trump to the UK for his first trip as U.S. president. But now she's left without certainty about her own future, knowing that Boris Johnson generally enjoys the support of hard Brexiteers within the Tory party. A formal leadership challenge would not come as a surprise now. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, London.
Theresa May wasted little time replacing Boris Johnson. She's appointed veteran MP Jeremy Hunt as her new Foreign Secretary. He previously held the position of Health Secretary. So is Ms. May's leadership on thin ice, and what is the fate of Brexit if she's forced out as Prime Minister? Joining me now from London in the United Kingdom is Christophe Bondy, former Senior Counsel to Canada on CETA and now Special Counsel at Cooley LLP. Hi, Mr. Bondy. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, how are you?
So earlier this year, you told a Brexit committee of British MPs that Brexit was like, quote, blowing up a bridge. Do you think the bridge has blown up now?
Well, it's not really the bridge that's blown up. What's been interesting is to see this quite significant shift in UK government policy as of this past Friday, finally recognizing, and this was on the back of many major employers in the UK, that they've lived with 45 years of deep integration in terms of their manufacturing economy with the rest of Europe, and that the so-called hard Brexit option of a really strong break with the rest of the EU was going to be very damaging to the UK economy. And so Mrs. May came out with this policy of the government that we are going to adopt a so-called soft Brexit, i.e. we're going to remain in regulatory alliance. And that seemed to hold for a short period of time over the weekend. But as we've seen, as of today, the so-called hard Brexiteers have broken ranks, have moved away. What is interesting to recall is that those hard Brexiteers are in a minority. So even if they do launch a leadership challenge against Mrs. May, it remains to be seen whether that silent majority of MPs who don't like anything like a hard Brexit will back them or rather support Mrs. May.
So what do you think that means for her leadership? Is too much being made about it being in at risk, I guess I should say?
Well, I think that the majority of MPs, even within the Conservative Party, don't back this so-called hard Brexit, which has never really shown any merit as far as I'm concerned from a trade law perspective. They've suggested that they need to break away from the rest of the EU in order for the UK to have its regulatory autonomy. The irony is that producers, manufacturers, service providers in the UK aren't asking for this. They say they want to break away from the rest of the EU in order to negotiate trade deals, as though the EU weren't negotiating those already, and as though there were sort of easy pickings in trade deals around the world, like places like India or China, which are actually quite difficult, or the United States. And you can imagine how difficult that is in the present context. So the hard Brexiteers haven't, from what I can see here, generated a majority in favor of their view. And so it remains to be seen if this walk away from Mrs. May's new option simply gives the government more scope to negotiate with the EU.
What do you think about their line of argument? For example, Johnson says that the soft Brexit plan risks limiting Britain's ability to strike trade deals with non-EU countries. Is that a realistic fear? Do you think Canada should be concerned?
I don't think so, in the sense that what the UK's proposal is right now is to remain in regulatory alignment with the EU. That's fine. They can still strike trade deals despite that, and to enter into some sort of customs facilitation arrangement with the rest of the EU. Now, that's the part that gets trickier, because what does actually that mean? And that's what the EU has been saying, the Commission. Well, how does that actually work? The technology for that doesn't actually exist right now. For you to collect, for example, import tariffs on our behalf and hand them to us. So that's the point where it gets murkier. But again, the point is, what is the relative benefit to the UK of having access to these potential trade deals, which are going to take a long time to negotiate, which the UK is going to negotiate as maybe 2 or 3% of the world economy, as opposed to being 27% of the world economy as a member of the EU? What's the benefit of that compared with the real deep and the real jobs right now in the UK that depend upon the relationship with the rest of the EU? That's the reality that finally hit home on Friday. And that's the reality these hard Brexiteers will not listen to.
Why won't they listen to it, though? Why is it so hard to convince them if so many jobs, for example, are on the line? Is it all political?
It's ideological. These people have, for a generation, well, from the start, a hard core of the Tory party has been viciously opposed to the EU and continues to be opposed to it on ideological grounds. They tend to be people who are older, who are less economically engaged. And then the interesting thing is, on the left, you have certain members of the left who say, well, the EU is a problem for us because it's diluting our labor force. It's bringing in lower cost labor from other parts of Europe. But what they're forgetting in that context is the EU means a very broad supply chain across the EU, and hence the renaissance, for example, of the UK car industry. So right now, there are very few purely UK products, in the sense that a car crosses over the EU-UK border which about 13 times before the car is even made. So that's what that's the reality that they need to take into account when considering the potential impact of a so-called hard Brexit. But again, the people who are opposed to this softer version are ideologically opposed to any kind of collaborative partnership between the UK and the rest of the EU.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. Bondi.
Thank you.